Hey, we are in week 4, last week of a series called Dream, and we've loved dreaming with you about what your faith could look like, what your circles could look like. The first week, we kind of just set some ground rules for what movement is, and we talked about that movement isn't like a country club, it's a community. It's a place for you to be real and to deal with your faith, and it's there's not these rules or regulations or things you have to do to fit in or be a part of movement. This is a space for you to come in however you are, whatever you are, or however weird looking you are, and be a part of what we get to do week in, week out. The next week, we kind of asked you the question, what are your dreams for your faith? We all have dreams. We all have goals in life, and we asked you specifically, we don't often spend a lot of time thinking about what our dreams are for our faith. Maybe it's that we finally get our parents to come to church with us, or maybe it's that we finally invite that one friend, or we can actually share our faith with that one friend, because we know that that's an awkward thing to do, is talking about Jesus with your friends. We kind of challenged you, what are your dreams for your faith? And then the next week, we talked about that all throughout history, Jesus has used small circles of people that were doing small things that created huge change. And there's purpose in your circle, in your friend group, in your small group. There's a purpose in that, and the people that you hang out with, that you can serve Kansas City, you can serve your school, you can serve our country, you could serve the world. You can bring people to Jesus because there's people around you that can do small things to help people meet Jesus. Tonight, we're wrapping up our dream series, and I want to kind of talk us through the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a dude in the Bible, and he's got his own book of the Bible, so he's kind of, these fancy... Hey, beautiful. It's I'm just mortified tonight. I looked in that trash can, and then I'm on the screen. This is weird. This feels like a dream. So Nehemiah was around in the 5th century BC. His job was a cupbearer to the king. I'm going to pause for a second. If you have your phones, your Bible, go ahead and pull it out and go to Nehemiah. It's in the Old Testament. I think it's the 16th book of the Bible maybe. So pull it out on your phone, or if you got your physical Bible with you, whatever you've got. There's I'm not going to force you to note take, but there's an app called the Bible app. That a lot of us maybe have, and it can give you different translations, and you can take notes in it and highlight things. Just want to invite you into that practice. You don't have to do that around here, but it's just something that you can get to do in the Bible app. So Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. Here's what this means. In that time, and still kind of today, people didn't necessarily like kings from other places, and so they would do whatever they could to try and kill the other nations and peoples and things, kings and royalty. And so they would have the most common way to do that wasn't through an army or through tearing down their place because they had armies themselves. The most common way to do it was actually to just poison the king. You could poison their food, you could poison their crops, whatever. And so the cupbearer's job was this. He got to eat whatever the king was going to eat. He got the first bite. Whatever the king was going to drink, he got to drink the first drink. And then they would watch him for about 10 minutes and make sure he didn't die. And then they would say, hey, king, you can eat this food because Nehemiah is alive. What a great job, partially. There's a good part in that you get to eat all of the fancy food, and a bad part that you might die. And so this was Nehemiah's job, was the cupbearer to the king. And the book of Nehemiah tells us this story of not only Nehemiah, but he rebuilt this wall, and this is kind of the story that we're going to dissect tonight. So in chapter 1, I forgot to tell you this. This practice of a cupbearer, did you know it actually still exists? The president has peeps who go to grocery stores before his people shop there, and tests food and tests where it came from, and this before anyone gets on Air Force One, all the food is tested. Now they don't just sit around and wait for someone to die. It's gotten a little more scientific, and they can kind of do some tests to understand if there's bad things in the food. This practice still exists. I thought that was fun. Anyway, so in chapter 1, in the book of Nehemiah, some people come to Nehemiah, and they're telling him that the town that he grew up in, where his ancestors are from, where he still has family at, Jerusalem, with this huge wall that surrounds the whole entire property, was destroyed. You can look back through all of history, and you can see castles and different things where they build these huge walls around the outside. Are we familiar with kind of what that looks like? We're this practice of maybe your fence around your house doesn't exist to protect you from being murdered, but this is a practice that this is what it came from, that we build things around things to keep things out. I don't know. That's weird, but it's true. So this is the practice, and the wall that protected Jerusalem had been destroyed. People were coming to pillage Jerusalem and coming to steal things and raid and all of these different things. And Nehemiah is really heartbroken about this. And in chapter 1, we read about this prayer where Nehemiah is like he feels like, hey, I want to do something about this wall that's been crushed. I know that my people are vulnerable, and there's this whole entire section of their safety that's been destroyed. And I feel like I have action in this. And so he starts kind of formulating this dream. And the first thing he does is he just says that this whole half of a chapter, he's just saying a prayer. And he's asking God, hey, I want to be involved in rebuilding this wall. Can you help me find a place in rebuilding this wall, in doing this thing that feels like this is what I'm being called to do? So Nehemiah is heartbroken. The second half of the chapter is that he's kind of asking God to help him play a role. And we see in this chapter that he starts to formulate this dream. He's hearing out, reflecting on, praying about something that God gave him that kind of broke his heart. We may remember last week I talked about, I think God gives all of us something that kind of breaks our hearts. Maybe it's homelessness or like, I don't know. There's a lot of different things, but I think God gives us all something that breaks our heart. And for Nehemiah, it was that the wall that protected his home city was destroyed. And so the first thing he does is he actually starts praying, and he goes and he just starts like talking through with God, like, hey, this is kind of how I'm feeling. And after a couple months pass, we get to chapter 2, and Nehemiah had this dream he'd been thinking about and praying about and fasting for. And in the second chapter of Nehemiah, we start to see him take some action here. And this is from Nehemiah 2. It says this: early the following spring, so again, like I said, a couple months later, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King, Artaxerxes, during Artaxerxes' reign, I, being Nehemiah, was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. Now, picture the scene. You are the king, okay? And your cupbearer, whose job is to look good after he eats food, doesn't look so good. And you are kind of going like, okay, your job is to not die while eating good food, and you don't look good. What's going on? You'd be a little concerned. And so the king asked him what's going on. It does this. Hey, there it is. Nehemiah replies to him. And he says this, I don't think it's on the screen. He says this: then I was terrified, so I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors were buried is in ruins. The gates have been destroyed by fire. So the king asked him, well, how can I help you? And with a prayer to the God of heaven, Nehemiah replied, if it pleases the king, and you're pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors were buried. So the king grants Nehemiah not only permission to leave this kingdom, but he also actually sends him with some, a couple soldiers, a small army. He sends him with a permission to get some supplies and wood and different things that he's going to need to rebuild this city. And we get to Nehemiah 2:11 and 16, and it talks about where he finally gets to Jerusalem. It says, so I arrived in Jerusalem 3 days later. It says, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me, when I had not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us except a donkey that I was riding. After dark, I went through the valley gate. I passed a well over the dung gate, which is exactly what it sounds like, so don't ask questions. It's fine. It's awkward. It's all good. To inspect the broken walls and burned gates. Then I went to the fountain gate and the king's pool. My donkey couldn't get through the rubble. He's really writing this as it's a really first-person account of what this kind of was looking like. It was still dark. I couldn't get through in the rubble. I went to the Kidron Valley instead, inspecting the wall before I turned back and entered again at the valley gate. Now, the city officials didn't know that I had been there, what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I hadn't spoken to Jewish leaders, priests, nobles, officials, or anyone in administration. But now I said to them, you know very well the trouble that we are in. Jerusalem, our city, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. And then he tells them about this gracious hand of God that's been on him, and all these people who he gathered together and that he's talking to said, yeah, let's rebuild the wall. That says they began the good work. And so here's kind of what's going on. Nehemiah went to inspect this wall. Now, show this next picture here. This is kind of a model of what the Jerusalem in the time of Nehemiah looked like. Now, this is not to scale. This is pretty small. But you can see down here in kind of the bottom corner, there's this dung gate, which again is what it sounds like. there's the king's garden and these different gates that are kind of all over this huge area of land where there were hundreds of thousands of people were living in this area. So Nehemiah went to inspect the wall. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing, which is really interesting that someone has a dream and they're like not really telling people. They're even going to look at the wall and not necessarily telling people. What Nehemiah was doing is he knew that if he just showed up in this city that he hadn't been in for years and said, hey, I'm going to rebuild the wall and I want you to help me, he probably would have received some harsh feedback. There were a lot of people who didn't want the wall rebuilt. This was really soon after this kind of had happened, and there were still people who were like really sad and kind of hurt and bandaged and all the things that were happening to the city. And so there wasn't a lot of morale around like, hey, let's rebuild this wall. And this is kind of like a common idea. We all, a lot of times, I think we have these dreams or goals or desires in life, and there's a lot of them that, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think sometimes we keep them to ourselves because we're scared of like the feedback we're going to get about the dream. Sometimes we have dreams that are like going to take a lot to achieve, or they're a really big dream, and we don't really tell people because it's like a laughable thing, maybe. Like, it's like, this is too big of a dream for you, or other people might not really care about it. Warren Wiersbe, who's a famous theologian, said this. I think we can relate to this just to show kind of what Nehemiah was facing. He said this: whether it's in the area of science or exploration, invention, business, government, ministry, just about everyone who has ever accomplished anything has faced ridicule. Does that land with everybody, right? Like, if you've done anything, you've probably faced something to get to what you were trying to do. So Nehemiah was this, was this mover and shaker, extreme leader. And if you want to talk about someone whose dream ignited a lot of people, Nehemiah is that person. We read in chapter 3, if you're like reading through chapter 1, we're moving through a lot of scripture tonight, so we're moving through a whole entire book of the Bible tonight. If you read through chapter 1 and chapter 2, there's kind of this stuff happening where all of this is building. And in chapter 3, all of a sudden, something clicks, and all of a sudden, everyone is like rebuilding this city. It starts talking about how the priests take one section of the wall to rebuild, and this family takes this section of the wall to rebuild, and next to them there was this family that decided to rebuild this part, and next to them there was this part, and the whole entire chapter 3 is just all of the people that were united around rebuilding this wall. It was a small circle of people. First it was Nehemiah, and then it was Nehemiah and a couple of the king's peeps, and then it was Nehemiah and like the nobles and the officials in the town, and then the whole entire nation, the whole entire city of Jerusalem, all the people, hundreds of thousands of people were united around this mission of rebuilding the wall. And I think that Nehemiah in this story shows us three really important things about leadership, and not only in leadership, but in this reality of like having dreams for your city, your faith, your school, whatever it is. David Campbell, who's an author, wrote a book only about chapter 2 of Nehemiah called The 21 Principles of Effective Leadership. We're going to boil them down to 3 because it's long, and we're going to try and simplify it tonight. And there's these 3 things that I think Nehemiah did that really show us a lot about how we can live out our dreams. Number 1 is this, that Nehemiah spent some time with his dreams. He didn't rush into doing his dreams. He like cultivated what was happening with the things that he wanted to do. He spent time, before he did anything else, when this dream first came to him, the first thing he did, it said that he immediately, look at this verse, this is what he did. He got this dream, and he said, when I heard this, like basically saying like right away, I sat down and I wept. I mourned for days, I fasted and prayed to the God of heaven. So he kind of sat with this reality of what was happening, and he went into like fasting and prayer. And I think this is a really important practice of what we get to do when we have these big ideas, when we have dreams for our faith. I think it's important to just start and like ask God. Like, okay, so I have this desire. I want to help. There's people in my city who don't have access to like a fresh food. I don't know. It's just a random idea, but like, what's my part in this? And I think it's important that we stop and we pray and we ask God what our role is. Is our role organizing the people to do the task, or is our role finding people that know something about this task to help us achieve this? Like, is it to find people who are passionate about it? Is it to like talk to people who know people? What's my role in this? Nehemiah took time with his dreams. He fasted over his dreams. He took a few months. Now, I'm not saying that you have to take a few months with your dreams, but there's this reality that like take some time, pray through and think think about your dreams. If God chooses to start talking to you through your literal dreams at night, or through like your desires and your hopes and your wishes and your dreams for the world, like talk to God about it. That seems really bottom shelf, really simple, but like ask God what your role is in this. It's important to make sure that whatever dream you have is coming from God. We need to spend time with our dreams and talk to God about our goals and aspirations, learning what our role is, hearing how we can involve others, which actually leads to number 2, is that Nehemiah, in his dream and with his dream to rebuild this wall, he sought out community. He didn't do this just by himself, or he was sent. First, he went to the king, and he was talking with the king about it, and then there were people that went with him because he knew he couldn't do it alone, and then when he got to the city, he goes and looks at night with other people, and then he takes time to gather resources and pray and understand exactly what's happening, and then he gathers a bunch of other people and helps, get them passionate about the same thing that he's passionate about, that really they were all passionate about, is protecting their city. So Nehemiah showed us a really great example, just again to call out what he did. In verse 11 it says this, "So I arrived in Jerusalem. 3 days later, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me, a small circle of people that did a really small thing, just noticing, looking at the things around them that created really big change." When you have a dream and you've talked to God about it, tell other people about it. You never know who's going to be passionate about that idea, or who's going to know the right person, or who's going to know a place that's already serving that you can plug in at. It's important that we were designed for community. We weren't designed just to do things alone. And this is an important principle that Nehemiah shows us. And number 3, he didn't let this dream that he had become his God. It's really easy when we have the big dream and want to achieve things, it's really easy to kind of let that rule your life. Does anyone relate to an idea that has kind of just taken precedent over anything else in your faith? This is a reality that people do. Your generation, statistically across the board, I'm not saying you in the room, but across the board, personal success is the number one most important thing to 56% of Gen Z. Personal success. That has nothing to do with faith, with their faith, or with helping others or anything. It's just the success of you is what your generation has statistically said. Now, I'm not calling anybody out in the room. I'm saying this is a reality for the generation of people that you're going to school with. And I don't want to open a can of worms tonight, but I want to know, raise your hand if you're an iPhone person. Oh, gosh. All right. And raise your hand if you're an Android person. 1, 2, 3 people. Great. I hope. What'd you say? 4? Oh, thank you. Yep. Sorry, losers. Anyway, so no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So statistically, across the board, this statistic is not true here. 62% of Americans have an iPhone, and there's 37% have an Android, and the rest have just some random things. This is one of the hottest debates that has ever existed. And Android people love to brag about their cameras where they can see the moon and all that stupid stuff. Anyway, so born in San Francisco in 1955, who is the guy that we all associate Apple with? Steve Jobs, correct. Steve Jobs, who was adopted, moved with his family to Mountain View, California, which we now call the Silicon Valley. It's kind of the hub of technology, in almost the whole entire world. This is where all these massive companies come together. As a child, Steve showed this really early interest in electronics and technology. His father, Paul, started showing him, introducing him to the world of mechanics, taught him how to disassemble and reassemble, toasters and, random household appliances and just different things like that. In high school, he met a guy named Steve Wozniak. This is the guy who doesn't get as much recognition for Apple, but together they created this Apple company. They dreamed about in high school what it might be like to be able to build something that is accessible to everyone with computers and technology and all these different things. After high school, Jobs only spent 1 semester in college before he dropped out. And it was this time away from his kind of formal education that he really started to dream of a supercomputer that's accessible to everyone. This dreaming, actually, he was so obsessed with this dreaming that it led him to really question life and our existence and why we're here. So he moved to India for a couple years to search out spiritual enlightenment is what he called this journey. And on this journey, he spent several months experimenting with meditation, alternative lifestyles, and this journey had a really big impact on the way he looked at his life. And he came back from this trip with a solidified dream where he said, this is what I want to do. I want to make a supercomputer that has all of the knowledge of the world that's accessible to every single person that everyone can own. With a simple dream, he went back to his friend Steve Wozniak of bringing this personal computer, revolutionizing technology. With a simple dream, a few people doing small things, the iPhone was created and the world literally changed because this is the thing now. Everyone has an iPhone. I remember my aunt got the first iPhone. We were at their house for Thanksgiving and I was playing a game on it. I thought it was so cool and I dropped it and the screen cracked. Because that's just what iPhones did back in the day. Does anyone have a cracked iPhone right now? I don't want to call anybody out. A few of us. Okay, that's fair. They still crack. So his daughter, Lisa, was born in 1978. She's an author and a writer. And in 2016, she wrote kind of a memoir, a story about her dad, Steve Jobs. And in this book, she talks about how her dad was so obsessed with his dream that he completely forgot about her. And she writes about how this damaged their relationship. And there's a quote that I want to share that kind of shows what this was like for her. She says this: "I see now that me and my dad, we were at a cross purpose. For him, I was a blot on just a spectacular ascent, as our story didn't fit with the narrative of greatness and virtue that he might have wanted for himself." And she says this: "My existence ruined his streak." The damage of the reality that dreams can actually be really dangerous too. I don't want to miss this reality that you can become so obsessed with becoming the right thing. You can become so obsessed with doing the right things and making the right paycheck and all of the different things that you might neglect the things that made Nehemiah who he was, that the community, the family that he had, and the purpose and the idea behind going to God. He kind of forgot. Nehemiah didn't forget God. Dreams can be dangerous, and Steve Jobs let his dreams become so impactful for him that he actually sacrificed a lot. Now, later in the book, they talk about how there was this reconciliation moment, and it was great, but Nehemiah didn't let his dreams become his God, and the reality is that after he built this wall, and he had all of the rights and all of the reason to become this incredible leader and incredible king and rule forever and never have to do anything small again, he actually went back to being the cupbearer. There was this reality that Nehemiah wasn't so focused on his own position and his own power and his own story that he knew that there were things that were bigger than him and bigger than his dream. He went back to being a cupbearer. He set realistic goals that we should share a dream with other people and achieve that dream with as many people as we can, and that we shouldn't get so lost in it that we can't find God in it. Over the last few weeks, we've talked a lot about our dreams, and you may have thought about something that you hope to do this year. Maybe it's that you wanted to get baptized, or you wanted to rally a team to serve at a thrift shop, or start maybe a ministry program, whatever it is. Here's a reality for this whole entire series as we're in the last week that I really want you to hear tonight. It's that movement, part of what we get to do is we get to exist to help you, realize that dream. If you have dreams for your faith, a personal goal that you want to be able to read the Bible cover to cover before the school year is over. Maybe it's that you want to be able to figure out how to finally invite that friend to church. We exist to help you do that. And I guarantee you that any leader, any adult in the room, and probably a lot of you as friends, if you said, "Hey, I'm having trouble figuring out how in the world I'm going to share my faith with my friend who's really got some stuff going on, and I want to just be able to encourage them," we would love to answer that question for you. And not always that we have all the answers, but we'd love to help walk with you to answer that question. I say this because we don't have it all figured out, and we know that nobody does, but we get to do life together. We love that we get to help you figure out how to take next steps. And I say this because we can spend all of the time in the world dreaming and thinking and planning, but if we don't ever do anything, we can have a dream that we want to reach people who church isn't reaching, or we can have a dream that we want to start whatever, or we want to get baptized, but if we don't do anything, what have we done? Years ago, a small group of people got together and dreamed. This is from a series just a couple weeks ago that Heartland did, and I want to just really quickly, he's going to say it better than I will, just check out this clip.
It's 1986. What a time to be alive in Kansas City. The economy's buzzing. The sports teams are crushing. The Chiefs have an epic brawl with their sworn enemies, the Raiders, in 1986 that forever becomes known as the Brawl. The Royals are on a plane to the White House to receive commendations from President Reagan for their 1985 victory over the Cardinals. Oak Park Mall is crammed with kids who are all sporting high-top sneakers, acid-wash jeans, and really big hair. As kids go back to school, they're delighted to find innovations have made their way to the classroom, that this year they'll have access to a new program in the classroom called Reading Rainbow. Anyone? 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 Yeah. On the radio, Papa Don't Preach is playing all the time. But nearby in Overland Park, a small group of people are gathering together in the quiet. They're gathering in the basement of a home, just a couple dozen people, because while the city is excited and while there's so much happening, they fear that there aren't as many people excited about the one true thing in life that matters, God. And all of these adults are volunteers with a ministry called Young Life, and they see scores of students coming and giving their lives to God, but they look around at the churches around the area and they say, where is the passion from the older generation? How can we build a community that reaches adults the same way we reach the youth? Armed with this question, they start to dream and they start to pray. They ask the question to themselves, what would happen if we took God really seriously, but we didn't take ourselves all that seriously? They ask the question, how can we take the greatest hope of the world and give it as a message in front of as many people as possible? This series is the story of this people. This is Heartland.
So this was from a series that Heartland did on main stage in the services on Sunday a couple weeks ago. But I think there's something really important in it, that a small group of people saw a need and got together in a basement and started doing small things like dreaming together and talking together and learning together and laughing together that has reached thousands and thousands of people and served all over the world and helped feed over I don't even remember what the number was, 80,000 some people in Kansas City with over 1 million pounds of food right outside of these doors right here, and sent people on missions all over the world and reached people in Kansas City because of a small group of people doing small things that created big impact. And what I want to ask you tonight is this: what is your dream? What's your next step for pursuing that dream? If you identified something over this series, do you have something that you can do? Is it calling someone? Is it telling someone? Is it just finding out where to serve? Is it literally just asking anyone, what is my next step? What's your next step for your dream, for your faith, for your circle, for your small group? What can you do to identify what the next step is? And finally, who can join you in that dream? Who can you experience your dream with, and how many people can you get on board, and how can you involve as many people as possible to take the gospel in places that it's not? Whether it's your home, your high school, your friend group, wherever it is, who can join you in that mission? I'm going to pray, and then we can head to small groups. God, thank you so much for tonight, and thank you for this series that we just get to think about the cool things that we find passionate, that we're passionate about. And God, we pray that the things that we love to do and the things that we're passionate about and the topics that we are really passionate about, the different things, God, we want to acknowledge that they come from you, the way that you designed us and created us. So we ask, God, that we can take real steps with our faith, that we can figure out what the next thing is that we can do that can help you know more people and more people know you. You love us, God, and we're so thankful for that. As we head into small groups in the rest of our week, we just ask that you bless this group, and we pray all these things in your name. Amen.